They had gold in their hands. Not glitter, not imitation. Gold. The kind forged in silence and suffering. The kind that asks you to face yourself. And they walked away. Just like that. They chose noise over truth. A thrill over depth. Familiar dysfunction over soul-wrenching transformation. And they told themselves it wasn't gold. That it was too much, too intense, too inconvenient. But somewhere, beneath the bravado, beneath the justifications, they knew. You don't forget gold. You just bury the memory. They left something sacred. Not because it was broken, but because it wasn't. Because it required a version of them they weren't ready to become. And now, the shadow won't let them rest. At night, it comes back, the echo of a laugh, the scent of a moment, the ghost of a gaze that saw through everything. Not the kind of memory you recall on purpose, the kind that haunts. Because you weren't just a chapter. You were a mirror, a reckoning, a chance to stop hiding. And they weren't ready. They thought they were walking into freedom, but what they walked into was exile. And now? Now they chase distractions that never satisfy. People who never see them. Moments that never anchor. Because when you abandon gold for dust, you don't just lose someone else. You lose access to yourself. The self that could have emerged in the presence of something real. The self that was finally ready to stop performing. But instead, they chose the familiar ache of emotional avoidance. And now the psyche, like an unforgiving tide, pulls them back to what they refused to face. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this is the fate they chose. A life half-lived, a restless sleep, a silence that won't leave them alone. So the great question is not, why did they leave? It's, what part of them felt so threatened by being truly seen? What wound was so deep that even love couldn't reach it? And what does the shadow now whisper, night after night, as they lie awake with their decisions? Because when you've touched something sacred, you can't go back to hollow. You can try, you can distract, you can pretend, but gold leaves a trace in the soul. And the dust? It never feels like enough. Easy to think they simply didn't care, that they weren't ready, that they lacked depth. But the truth is rarely that simple. They weren't running from you. They were running from themselves. Because to truly receive gold, to be loved in your rawness, your darkness, your truth, you must first believe you are worthy of it. And most people aren't ready for that kind of confrontation. They say they want love, but what they really want is comfort. Something that doesn't rattle the cage they've built around their heart. Something that doesn't ask them to evolve. Because real love, real connection, it's annihilation. It shatters the false self. It drags the unconscious to the surface. It exposes the masks. And many would rather walk into the arms of emptiness than face that level of truth. Carl Jung called this the moment of individuation, the terrifying process of integrating the unconscious, the shadow, the wounded child, and the denied self. But to begin that process, one must first acknowledge that something is missing, and that requires stillness, which they've spent their whole life avoiding. So they keep moving, from person to person, from high to high. They fill their life with noise, drama, pleasure, performance, all to avoid hearing the one thing they cannot outrun, the echo of your presence in their unguarded mind. Because you didn't just love them, you saw them, and that is what scared them most. You reached beneath the surface. You touched the parts they've kept hidden even from themselves. You mirrored their potential, the version of them that could rise, evolve, become. But they weren't ready to evolve. They were addicted to who they had always been, the avoidant, the pleaser, the charmer, the victim, the one who never had to be truly known. So they return to dust, relationships, where nothing is asked of them but their performance, environments where their mask is enough, connections where the script is already written. No challenge, no depth, no mirror. Philosophers like Nietzsche warned of this, the fear of becoming, the human tendency to reject growth because it threatens comfort, to fear the abyss of the self, even if that abyss holds your salvation. And this is the root of the problem. They did not leave because the gold was flawed. They left because it was too real, because to stay would have meant transformation. And not everyone is ready to rise. So they ran, not because they didn't feel it, but because they felt it too much, because the shadow had started to stir. The lies they told themselves were unraveling. The persona was cracking. And instead of stepping into the fire, they chose the familiar safety of ashes. But the psyche is not easily fooled. You can suppress the truth, but you cannot destroy it. What is repressed returns. What is denied festers. And that love, the one they abandoned, becomes a ghost they carry, not because of what it was, but because of what it could have made them become. That's what the shadow knows. That's why it won't let them rest, because their unfinished evolution is still echoing through the halls of their subconscious. And no matter how far they run, the gold waits, not to punish, but to remind. They thought walking away would free them. They imagined peace, a lighter life, a simpler love, a return to the familiar rhythm of detachment. But gold does not release so easily, especially when it's the kind that touched the soul before the mind could process it, because that kind of encounter rewrites the internal script. And once rewritten, the old lines no longer fit. So now, they go through the motions, smiling in photos, performing affection, filling their days with stimulation. But something is off. Something follows. A tension beneath the laughter. A silence between distractions. A dull ache that intensifies when the noise fades. This is the consequence. Not punishment, but awakening deferred. They begin to realize. Nothing feels as rich. No one feels as real. Conversations feel hollow. Touches feel distant. Attention no longer nourishes, it only sedates. Because when you've known gold, everything else tastes like dust. The shadow knows. It watches them try to replace depth with convenience. It watches them replay moments from a connection they claim to have forgotten. It watches them reach for new faces, new arms, but find no sanctuary. And at night, when their guard is down, when the phone is silent, when the mask slips, the shadow whispers. It reminds them of what they gave up, not for survival, but for safety, not because they were unloved, but because they were afraid to be loved in a way that made hiding impossible. This is the consequence. Hauntedness, the kind that doesn't scream. It lingers. It weaves into their decisions. It shows up in their dreams. It interrupts joy without explanation. Because when the soul has tasted something real, it cannot pretend forever. They find themselves chasing extremes. More stimulation, more partners, more ambition. But all of it feels thin, because what they lost wasn't just a person. It was resonance, a sense of being met, a mirror that reflected not just who they were, but who they could become. And now that mirror is gone, so they look outward again and again, but see only reflections of their fear. They speak of freedom, but are never still. They speak of peace, but are never rested. They speak of happiness, but it always needs proof. Because the soul does not forget gold, and the shadow will not let them settle for less. Not because it's cruel, but because it knows what they are running from. It knows that dust was never meant to satisfy. It was only meant to delay. And the longer they run, the louder the unrest becomes. So the question is no longer, Why did they leave? But how long can they survive the silence within them? Because gold does not beg to be reclaimed. It waits, and it knows. If they ever stop running, truly stop, they will hear it again. Not your voice, but their own, the one that once knew it was meant for more. And until they face that voice, nothing will ever be enough. The rebellion doesn't begin with grand gestures. It doesn't start with an apology or a dramatic return. It begins quietly with a reckoning, a moment of unbearable stillness, a confrontation with the truth they buried the moment they walked away, that it wasn't you they abandoned. It was the part of themselves that could have finally come alive in your presence. This is the root of their unrest. They betrayed their becoming. And now, if they dare, the rebellion must start there. Not with reaching out, not with trying to fix the past, but with facing what they've become in the absence of truth. Because when you abandon gold for dust, you inherit the burden of pretending it was never valuable. But the soul keeps the receipts. So what does rebellion look like? It looks like stopping the endless distractions, stopping the lies, stopping the noise long enough to hear the quiet ache beneath the bravado. It means daring to be still, to feel, to allow the shadow to speak without censoring it. Carl Jung called this the beginning of shadow integration, the process of reclaiming the exiled parts of the self, the vulnerable child, the terrified lover, the one who longed to be known but was taught to fear it. To rebel against dust is to face the pain of having chosen it. It's allowing regret to do its sacred work, not to punish, but to wake you up. It means tracing the moments where fear hijacked love, where comfort outweighed truth, where they convinced themselves they were too much or not enough. It means breaking the contract with the false self, the one that needed to be in control, the one that chose easy love over transformative love, the one that could not survive in the presence of gold because it demanded evolution. This rebellion is not romantic. It is raw. It is ugly. It is sacred. And if they do it, if they stand in that internal storm long enough, something begins to shift. They begin to see the outlines of their soul again, not as it was defined by others, but as it existed before fear shaped it. They remember, not just you, but the version of themselves they once glimpsed in your presence. The brave one, the honest one, the one who could be loved without performance. And now, the question becomes, can they reclaim that version? Not to win you back, not to make amends, but to finally stop living in fragments. Because that is the ultimate rebellion, to become whole in a world that feeds on your division. If they dare to take that path, they will have to grieve. Grieve the time they lost. Grieve the truth they denied. Grieve the version of you they never truly received. But through that grief comes resurrection, not of the relationship, but of the self. Because what they lost when they abandoned gold was not just a person, it was a portal to depth, to growth, to meaning. And if they're brave enough to face that, they just might find their way back, not to the past, but to the version of themselves that never stopped longing for truth. You don't escape gold. You either rise to meet it or spend the rest of your life haunted by its absence. And that's the truth they never wanted to face. That what they walked away from wasn't just a person. It was a mirror, a moment, a call. And now, that call echoes, not as memory, but as lack, not as guilt, but as hunger. Because the shadow remembers. The shadow carries every truth they denied, every softness they rejected, every version of themselves that was ready to be born and wasn't. It does not torment them to be cruel. It whispers because it knows. They were never meant to stay asleep. And here is the most powerful realization of all. They didn't lose you. They lost themselves in the moment they refused to choose you. Because choosing you wasn't just about a relationship. It was about choosing growth, choosing transformation, choosing the death of the ego and the birth of the soul. But they weren't ready to die to who they were. So they stayed the same, at the cost of becoming everything they were meant to be. And that is the wound the shadow now reopens every time they lie to themselves. Every time they say it didn't matter. Every time they feel restless and don't know why. Because this kind of loss isn't loud. It's subterranean. It weaves into the architecture of identity. It haunts the quiet corners. And the world keeps spinning. They move on. They post. They laugh. They live. But something inside them remains unlived. A sacred thread cut too soon. A truth unopened. And so, the soul remains. Unrest. Because gold does not disappear. It waits. Not to be reclaimed, but to be recognized. Not every story ends in reunion. But every soul must return to the place where it turned away from truth. Not for closure, but for completion. So here is your freedom. You were never just someone they left. You were the mirror they couldn't bear to face. The invitation they weren't ready to accept. The threshold they refused to cross. Their panic was not about losing you. It was about losing access to their own evolution. And maybe one day, they'll finally listen to the shadow. They'll stop running. They'll sit in the ache and hear the truth that's been there all along. But that is their path. Yours? Yours is to stay gold. To never dim your light for the comfort of those who fear its brilliance. To never perform smallness in the hopes that someone will finally feel big enough to meet you. To trust that your wholeness will never feel like too much to the one who has met their own. So let them go. Let them wander. Let the shadow keep whispering. And you rise. Because you were never meant to be anyone's wake-up call. You were meant to wake yourself up first. And if these words stirred something deep within you, a memory, a truth, a silent ache, that's not a coincidence. It's your own shadow, calling you back to yourself. So don't scroll past. Don't silence what's been trying to speak through you. Sit with it. Write it. Share it. Let someone else know they're not alone in this reckoning. And if you're ready to walk this path, not the path of performance, but the path of truth, subscribe. Because here, we don't sugarcoat the soul's pain. We speak it. We integrate it. We rise with it. One shadow at a time. One truth at a time. One gold-forging flame at a time. You've already begun.